If you ever wanted to know what an enemy of America might sound like, this is it. This is a guest from a recent live stream that I did, and it's something that I think every American needs to listen to carefully.
Doing well, thank you for having me.
I saw a couple of your comments, so obviously I think you're going to disagree with some of the things I said, so let's hear it.
Well, no, I just
Okay,
have a different take on them. It's a
great.
glass half empty, glass half full type of situation.
Even better.
I think what you haven't considered, what most people can't imagine, is that there's a number of people who are very serious about accomplishing this change, for which Trump was just a vehicle, the vehicle chosen by Providence, if you will. But we've been waiting for a very long time, and we're very serious people. I mean, this isn't to say we're anti-American. I'd say we're the real patriots. The real patriots, I think, would see clearly that living by a status quo and the ghosts of the 18th century is not sufficient to withstand the world of the now. And I think President Trump's presidency examples that.
You don't believe that the founding fathers and their creation of the Constitution applies today?
Well, it had a good run. It lasted for a few hundred years. No republic in the history of this planet, sir, not one, has lasted longer than 300 years. Not one.
How long has the Roman
Not-
Empire lasted?
Well, that you make my point. That's exactly where we're at. We're at the transformation point between the republic and the empire. That's the time we're living in. And it's the parallels are, people draw the parallels every day, and it's apt to draw the parallels, but that's where we're at. Rome had a republic of about 300 years. Through a number of circumstances very similar to our own, it transitioned to an imperial model, various imperial models actually. And President Trump, I think, very clearly is our Caesarean figure.
What's the definition of Caesarean figure?
Caesareanism, you could say, is a strong man who comes to power through semi-democratic means and is able to transform the system into a stable autocracy.
So would Adolf Hitler fit that?
No,
Why not?
because he was not an authoritarian, he was a fascist.
Okay, and what's the difference between
There's a difference.
fascism and authoritarian?
Sure. That's a great question too. And I think it's a key point for people to understand. Fascism wants you to be something. It's active. Authoritarianism is reactive. It says you can't do this. Fascism says you will be this. That's the key difference. So within an authoritarian structure, there's infinite room for various freedoms. Freedom of religion, freedom of speech, just not unlimited room. That's the difference. And the surest prevention to any type of fascism is an authoritarian government. There are certain trends in the history, you could call it civilizational trends or economic trends, that no system can navigate forever. The time we're entering right now, the world we're in right now, demands a change. And either we can adapt quickly and suffer less, or we can try to cling on.
It demands a change, or certain groups of people are trying to force change for their own benefit?
Well, my own take would be that the cart doesn't move the horse moves the cart. So it's events that are almost, I think the one pandemic event we all lived through kind of informed us that we can do very little to impact larger events. Even governments themselves can do very little to impact something. All you can do is adapt to it.
All right, so
So
we have a great comment here from Epic Eclipse. He said, the democracy crumbled when lobbying came to be as big of the rise as it is now. All right,
Sure.
so let me clarify that. So that's because it's a great comment. You could argue easily that if the American political system and its people prevented the amount of corruption from money into politics, that we would not be on the decline in terms of our democracy.
Sure, but that's like saying, see that water, make it run uphill. It's impossible to do. And I want to, just in context, sir, it's a cycle. So you have a monarch, he becomes abusive, they become a tyrant, they're overthrown by an aristocracy, which becomes abusive. They're overthrown by an oligarchy, which becomes abusive, which is overthrown by a democracy, which becomes abusive, and you're back to square one. It's, the
Democracy
great
becomes
story.
abusive? Where?
Well, look at what you're seeing when you have people who are willing to vote just along a narrow margin to hurt the other side rather than work for some mutual good. I think whether it's the right or the left, it's a failed democracy. And it's only a matter of time.
It's a failed
before-
democracy, or those people being manipulated, just like fascists would have done,
I mean-
to manipulate them to vote a certain way against their own best interest?
But we see this cycle across the history of the world.
Of
It
course we
doesn't
do.
change.
I'm not arguing with that. I'm not saying there isn't a cycle, but why do you think the cycle has to happen now? That makes no sense. Because if there's nothing more powerful. Hold on one second. There's nothing more powerful than the power of the people. And if the people wanted to eliminate corruption and prevent these forces from taking over, and they were aware of this happening, I would argue, could easily prevent, and we could go on another 300 years, because the founders also know democracy is an experiment, and maybe that experiment will end up flaming out someday. just because it's happened in the past, you're arguing that it has to happen again and it's going to happen now and there's no reversing it. That
Yeah,
behooves
but
me.
these people who you're quoting as saviors of democracy exulted in the ownership of other human beings. This is a pretty big flaw in their argument, I have to say. They exulted in it. They didn't just accept it, they exulted in it. They loved it. They loved every aspect of the slave system.
But then on 13th President Abraham Lincoln, they eradicated it. So I don't know where you're
Well,
going with that.
I'm talking about the founders, though, the people who came up with this democratic idea.
Well,
They're
at
not
that,
as pure as you may think. Is
I'm
what I
not
was
saying
saying.
they're pure. At that time, and they had an opportunity, like you said earlier, like many civilizations or most would have thrived beyond belief with our natural resources. I understand that. But I think what you're failing to take into consideration is when they had an opportunity because they were able to move away from the monarchs of Europe and you had a melting pot of not every demographic, but different cultures
Yeah,
from
it was more
England.
equal than anything else
And they
at the time.
decided like, hey, this what's been happening around the world. And they were very intelligent, right? They were educated. Many of them were lawyers and they were scholars. And they decided, hey, we want to form something different because everything that we've learned about and came from in Europe is not working. So, and they brought their baggage with them, right? They brought the times of the world, slavery and other things with them. But they still set up a constitution that said all men are created equal, and it ended up being that way after Lincoln fought for it, right, in the
Yeah,
Civil War.
sure.
So that is why the Constitution came to being, is that a group of founders, very intelligent men, said we need to create something different, and we're going to call it an experiment, and we're going to create this wonderful document called the Constitution. Those are two different
You're
arguments.
totally right.
Right.
And we were predisposed to some sort of egalitarian government just by virtue of the vast land and the sheer amount of resources. I mean, when you have a country with either a struggling economy or a huge wealth gap, you're going to have a despotism. When you have a country that's rich as Midas, it's going to be more egalitarian. Just like, I mean, look at Switzerland. I mean, they're loaded to the gills, and they're one of the probably the most democratic countries in the world with the most like equitable systems. But my point is that we can't. You made a great point earlier about are we changing it? I think that now is the time to accomplish the transition from one state to another because we can do so, and it would cost our country the minimum amount of pain in the
What
transition.
would that
And I
state
think
look
Trump.
like?
Well, first of all, the republic, quote unquote, is always going to be there. We're always going to have three branches of government. No one's ever going to wear a crown. It's just going to be the real matters of government will move behind that window dressing, which you're already seeing.
That's
You're seeing the
corporatocracy
first
or a
stage.
plutocracy, right? Or some
Well, I mean,
variation,
yeah,
oligarchy,
it's
whatever.
already there. I mean, it's just people are refusing to accept it. But I think Trump has a chance if he can do a third term, which I'm hoping for, because that would be the, I don't want to say the nail in the coffin. That's too brutal a phrase, but it would be the last stroke needed to move beyond purely constitutional rule to give the executive the latitude it needs to deal with the terrible, terrible problems we're going to be facing.
You call
I
it an
mean,
executive, but that's just masked as authoritarian or fascist, one or the other.
well, there's not fascist, it's just authoritarian. I'm
Okay,
sorry, I don't believe.
let me stop you there. Okay, so you made an argument that people need to accept it. I would argue absolutely fucking not. We don't need to accept it. This is the United States of America. We fought for our religion in a revolutionary war. They fought two world
Oh,
wars.
religion's part of this, by the way.
That
Religion
that's
will be
fine,
part.
but we're
It
going to
has
take
to be a
that out. Of
fusion.
course, religion is always part of it, right?
It has to be a fusion of church and state.
No, I think that's not what the. So then you're arguing. So obviously you've been arguing that you're not a fan of the Constitution and constitutional democracy or representative democracy is something that you want to see go away, and that's fine. But I would
For the
argue,
benefit of the
I'm going to
people.
say your line of thinking, the American experiment and the creation and formation of the United States of America is not based on people just rolling over and saying accept it to that the demise of the greatest representative democracy that's ever been, as short as has been 300 years, is it's okay. Because that's not the American spirit. The American spirit is we fight for our freedom. That's what the entire culture is based on. Fight for our freedom. We fight for American values. But to say you're the real American patriot, if you implied that earlier, I think most people watching this would say you're nuts.
No government in the history of the world, sir, ended the way it began. And I don't mean little changes like the constitutional amendments give us. I mean radically different governments and times that either you change or you don't survive. So I would just leave you with that thought. And I think that there's no bad thing about the Constitution except that its time is over now. And we can always hold it dear. Maybe our grandchildren will have one again. Maybe there will be more democracy in the future, but that time we're going into is a time of tooth and fang, and we better prepare ourselves for it.
All right. So what do you think of his views? Do you agree that the Constitution has had its run and it's just over now? If you're an American that agrees that we should be fighting for freedom, liberty, the rule of law, I ask you to join me here at TK Civics and subscribe. Please see the links under my profile